Welcome back to another episode of ROC Boys Football. We got some breaking news, instant reaction as the first top 25 college football playoff rankings have dropped Tuesday night. Have a couple points we want to make. This is more of an instant reaction as opposed to that we sat down and thought about it, talking about some of the best teams in the country, how the college football playoff committee is viewing these teams and what seems to be their criteria of putting certain teams higher than the other. Before we get into it, though, as usual, just want to say thank you guys for the support you guys have shown the channel. All college football fans, man, we have had a blast talking ball with you guys in the comment section. So if you like the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Boys struggling a little bit. Dill, I'm going to kick it off to you. Top four, Tennessee, Ohio State, Georgia, Clemson. What are your initial takes on these teams?
I'll start with the top three because I personally don't have a big problem with it. And I know some people are probably going to hate having Tennessee up there. But, I mean, if we're going aside from preseason rankings, Tennessee has looked as good as anyone. They've played some real tough teams, beat the brakes off of, I think, a decent Kentucky team. Not a great Kentucky team, but a good one. And then, obviously, they're winning against Alabama is as big of a win as anyone.
Beat the brakes off a top 10 LSU team, too. They're 10th in this range. So, what's interesting to me, and it's really, quite frankly, it doesn't matter. It's very early. These teams are going to play each other. We have Tennessee going on the road to play Georgia this weekend. Tennessee is the most impressive resume. And so when you see Tennessee at number one, it's like the college football committee is looking at overall resume, the amount of wins they've had, the quality of wins. That makes sense. But then you see Ohio State sitting at two, and you're looking at their resume. They go on the road and beat Penn State. They were outgained. If it wasn't for 4 Penn State turnovers, I'm not saying Ohio State's not the better team. They probably are. They are. It wasn't like that much of a convincing win. And then you get Georgia, who's had some good wins. To me, it seems like they're going resume with Tennessee, and then they're kind of going just like eyeball test with Ohio State. Kind of interesting point there, I feel like.
I think the issue is like Georgia's had their own gaffes too. Almost losing to Missouri is not a good look because Missouri's a weak team, obviously. Yep. Playing Kent State kind of tough is, and I don't. That one is what it is. Like that is true, and I think people are forgetting how good Oregon's looked ever since. But
they got Oregon 8.
And I don't know. To me, like you could argue about the top three. I think those three are the top three.
Yes.
I don't think there's much question right now. I think once you get into, you're really splitting hairs, and I think people like to do that and talk about it. But I think you're right. Like it's going to figure itself out there. Those top three, I think, are unarguable. Whether you order them different, whatever. I think the real issue comes in for these next.
I agree. My biggest gripe, and yes, we are both Michigan fans, but when you look at Clemson, when you look at Michigan, you look at the resumes, I get Michigan didn't play a strong out-of-conference schedule, but they've beaten teams. They beat the brakes off of Penn State. They beat the brakes off of Michigan State. They beat Maryland. Maryland's a very good team. You look at the resume, it's probably pretty even. Like, is Syracuse that great? Wake Forest, they just got smoked by Louisville. It took Clemson double overtime to get that done. You look at the eyeball test. You look at the strength of schedule. You look at the resume. I find it very hard to make the argument that Michigan is not the better football team.
And if we're going to base any of this on preseason rankings, which we obviously are, like Michigan, you look back to last year, Clemson was kind of not a middling team, but they weren't even in the question of like being one of the better teams in college football. So I don't know. I feel like they are disrespecting Michigan a little bit. And,
I don't think you need to base it off the preseason rankings though, because we've seen 8 games now. This isn't.
I guess how else can you split the difference on some of these teams? Like, yes, Michigan, Clemson.
You split the difference on looking how they've played in the 8 games.
The bulk of their teams though. They haven't gotten into their really tough games. I don't even know that Clemson has Notre Dame might be their best game in the slate. Of course, Michigan's going to show themselves when they play Ohio State. We all know that. I think you have to base some of it on preseason rankings because how else are you going to split it with these teams that are supposed to beat every team they play up until certain games by 20 points?
I think the interesting conversation comes in when Clemson's probably going to run the table. I don't see them losing another game. If they lose one, they're out. They just don't have the schedule. They don't have the strength of schedule. They don't have the resume to get in as a one-win team. If they one-loss team, if they run the table, win the ACC, conference champ, undefeated, they get in. And then you're probably looking at the winner of Michigan, Ohio State on the outside. The winner probably being maybe the number one team in the country, assuming the SEC teams might beat each other up. And then the loser probably sitting at 5 because we probably have Ohio State and Michigan running the table here. And then I think two of the interesting conversations to have is, could we possibly see 2 SEC teams and 2 Big Ten teams in the college football playoffs?
What will be a crime is if they leave an undefeated TCU team out. Because frankly, how they've ranked these so far, that's looking like a bit of a possibility. And that would be an absolute crime because the Big 12's actually been pretty good, I think. You look at what Texas was able to do against an Alabama team with no Quinn Ewers for the most part. I don't know. Again, you're just looking, and this is obviously early, and I'm sure it's going to play itself out. But if Bama doesn't lose another game, Georgia doesn't lose a game, and then you got a bunch of one-loss SEC teams, and you get 2 of them in over a TCU, that'd be a crime. And again, they've set these rankings up where they're kind of saying that.
Oh, they're trying to do it. They're 100% trying to do it. Now, you talk about –
I don't think TCU is going undefeated either. So
yeah, I do think the Big 12 will beat each other up at some point. And you look at what TCU's done. They beat Oklahoma with Dylan Gabriel out, even though they looked like the better team when Dylan Gabriel wasn't hurt. They were on the ropes against Kansas State. Adrian Martinez didn't play. Will Howard goes out with an injury. The backup comes in, throws a pick.
Yeah.
They've been very fortunate with – and then Jalen Daniels goes out against Kansas. They've played a lot of teams that just didn't have their quarterback once. And so they're sitting at 8-0.
We know that. We've been betting them every week, 7-point spreads, and it's a dogfight to cover these 7
and these teams, exactly. We're doing pretty well on TCU. They're barely covering for the boys. They are not looking like a dominant team. So when you bring in the eyeball test, it is really hard to argue that TCU is a better team than teams like Alabama.
True, but I just want to leave it. If they're undefeated, they have to be in.
I would probably agree with you. Let's take a look at the rest of the top 15. And basically, I want to open it up to, are there any teams that if they run the table, looking at Oregon, probably the biggest one, if Oregon runs the table, they look like a far different team than we saw week 1 against Georgia, which they have in their last 7 games. Can any of these teams get in?
I think USC probably has the best chance because they'll have the best loss at the end of the day. I think
on the road at Utah,
most people watch that think like they were winning that game for most of the game until the end. And I think USC, like the allure of it and the whole, it's USC. I think they're the ones with the best chance. And I think it'll weigh on Oregon the fact that they got the doors blown off them by Georgia where they didn't even really look competitive. So that's my intuition. I think UCLA maybe, but even then, I don't know. They did bad by Oregon.
My lean is Oregon here just because of how they've looked. And then they have the biggest potential kind of boosting themselves up. They play Utah, a team that USC lost to. And then they'll get to play USC if USC continues to win in the Pac-12 championship game. Oregon seems to be the team that if there was a team to run the table here and have a legitimate argument as a one-loss team, it probably needs to be Oregon. But again, you need help. You need certain things at the top. You need to see some ugly wins where if Tennessee gets blown out by Georgia, and even then it's kind of hard to justify them putting them in over Alabama.
I mean, the problem will be is if Michigan, Ohio State have a dogfight and one of them is a one-loss team, I think they're probably getting in over anyone.
Yes, a one-loss. So Michigan goes into Columbus, loses by 3 points in a very close game. You have to lean Michigan over Oregon. And again, I understand the argument that just forget Oregon's brutal loss against Georgia where they didn't even look competitive, but it's hard to forget that. Because it's there. And
I almost feel like the way this ranking is set up now, Ohio State would be the better chance. If they have one loss too and they lose a nail biter to Michigan, like how are they going to get knocked back that far?
Yeah, the committee loves Ohio State. And Ohio State, they're the sexy team, like CJ Stroud.
Ohio State, as much as I don't like them, they deserve like their little pedestal because, in fairness, there's been 3 really good teams for 10 years, and it's Ohio State, Clemson, Bama. And Georgia's emerging into that next team.
Yes.
But I think those teams that have been dominating the sport, they deserve like a little perch, if you will.
What about Illinois beats Michigan, then goes to the Big Ten championship and beats Ohio State and are fighting
that's just not happening, so it's irrelevant. Now, I'm not going to talk to you about like if the moon crashes into the earth.
Any other takes that you have that are kind of wild to see some teams in there? I think Penn State is rightfully there at 15. I think they're a very good team that just ran into 2 really, really good teams in Michigan and Ohio State. Tulane making some noise.
I don't know anything about Tulane, really.
I know me neither. I know that they're 7-1 with a win over Kansas State. But other than that, I mean, Texas, they're trying. I just feel like they're.
No, Texas is good. Texas is good. They lost a couple of games without Ewers, but when they have Ewers, they're a problem.
And Quinn Ewers
they would have beat that. He did look bad against Oklahoma State, but
they're throwing Texas in to give Bama a top 25 win. I see it. They're not fooling anybody.
That's a good SEC.
They aren't putting it by me. They aren't putting it by me. Texas is a sexy team. They aren't putting it by me. They're doing anything they can. One thing we'll close out on is I am kind of surprised that they're leaving out some of these SEC teams that you could have an argument. Like I'm surprised maybe like Mississippi State or Kentucky not in there. But they also have a lot of these SEC teams up here. Ole Miss and LSU.
There's too much ACC in this, I'll tell you that. The ACC is not that good.
I'm probably with you. Like after what you saw against Wake playing Louisville,
NC State's not the 21st best team.
It's awfully hard to justify that. And even UNC's played with their food in almost every single game they've played. Like they're 7-1. They lost to a not so good Notre Dame team. You look at the wins they have. Yeah, they're 7-1 in the ACC, but they have not looked dominant. They don't play defense for squat. Their offense is fine. Drake May, I think, is going to be a future first-round pick, probably a number 1 overall pick. But it's really hard to justify that this ACC conference is any good at all. That'll probably do it. I don't have any other takes. What I close it out on is it's early. Like these teams are all going to play.
I know it's all going to shake out. It always does. There's always 3 teams essentially who are really good, and then you could argue about the 4th team who's going to go get their doors blown off by number 1. So
yeah, that does seem
basically college football.
That does seem how it goes, and it is going to play it out. It is interesting to see like the Michigan Clemson, just like the value they have on the ACC right now. Like they just think the ACC is good. The ACC is not good. And so you see Syracuse, you see Wake, you see NC State. Like those teams, I don't think are much better than some of the teams you see in the Big 12 or some of the teams you see in the Big 10. But that's how the committee's seeing it right now. Again, it'll change. We'll jump on every Tuesday night and just talk about what the committee thinks and try to get inside these guys who apparently have galaxy brains. But again, it's fun to talk about, but it really does not matter this early in the season. We appreciate you guys checking us out. Again, want to keep it short for you, just give our thoughts. A lot of you guys have been asking who our top 10 teams are. I'll give you, we had 2 people ask who our top 10 teams are. I'm going Tennessee, then I'm going Georgia, then I'm going Ohio State, Michigan, then I'm going Clemson. I'll put Bama over TCU. Or, I kind of agree with this. There's not a team, I kind of like this top 10 outside of LSU. I have some question marks about LSU. Yeah, that'll do it. Want to throw that in there again. We appreciate you guys checking us out. The support from the channel has been unreal. And we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.